In a week full of trick-or-treaters, I think it's safe to say that Nintendo surprised Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack subscribers with a real treat. This week brings a double creature feature thanks to the release of both Shadow Man and Turok 2 Seeds of Evil, two M-rated Nintendo 64 games that are perfect for the Halloween season. Yeah, that's cool news. But are either of these games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Next Generation, Edge, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. Get that voodoo magic ready, because this is another dinosaur-filled episode of the Nintendo Switch Online review crew. Coming only 2 years after he was first introduced in the pages of the Shadow Man comic book, Michael Leroy was the perfect fit for video gaming's next great anti-hero. He was darker and more menacing than many of his contemporaries, fighting off dead-side demons with voodoo magic and mysticism. Acclaim, who actually owned Valiant Comics at the time, was quick to pounce, hoping to recreate the success of one of their other comic book characters, Turok Dinosaur Hunter. Shadow Man was certainly darker in tone, sending players through a horror-themed world dripping with gruesome style and atmosphere. And you know what? The gamble paid off, mixing elements that included everything from 3D brawling to a Metroidvania-style structure. Shadow Man proved to be popular enough to warrant a 2002 sequel. But hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves, because we're here to see what the critics said about the original Shadow Man, not the sequel. When it comes to Electronic Gaming Monthly, they certainly liked the game, but didn't love it. They gave it an average of 8 out of 10, with scores ranging from 7 all the way up to a 9. Che's right in the middle, giving it an 8. I have a sick fascination with the movie Angel Heart, and Shadow Man instantly brought me back to that milieu. The game starts off a little slow, but you've got to let the story gather some momentum. As I progressed through Shadow Man, I found myself becoming more sadistic and overcome with the strange urge to listen to throbbing gristle. You've got to check out how much speech there is on this card, at least. I almost forgot it was the Nintendo 64. Chris, on the other hand, also liked it, but not as much. Shadow Man reminds me of what a darker, more disturbing version of Tomb Raider would be like. It's not a game you're going to finish in a few hours. The levels are big and branch out into different sections, so you're not always sure where to go next. Gameplay-wise, it's not groundbreaking and sometimes suffers from that very Nintendo 64 textured look. But it has its moments. Now, EGM's score is right in line with where a lot of the critics were at the time. 8 out of 10 is the exact same score that you saw Edge give the game in their 76th issue, while Nintendo Power went a little bit higher with an 8.3 out of 10. Game Informer wasn't as kind, giving the game an average score of 7.75 out of 10. Rainer, the raging gamer, explained that as a comic, Shadow Man couldn't find its identity and as such was sentenced to an excruciatingly painful death. As a video game, this comic is born again and stands out as an entertainment property that plays well and delivers a fascinating story. At times, this voodoo-intensive saga is hard to digest. Some of its material is quite grim and the overall sensation is downright depressing. Granted, some cheesy dialogue and strange animations do add some light here and there, but for the most part, the title is remarkably dark. For a game I had little faith in, I'm surprised how polished it turned out to be. Moving down the scale, GameFan found the game to be a bit disappointing, giving it an average score of 74%. Of course, that's nothing compared to Next Generation, who gave the game the lowest score, and it wasn't even close. Giving Shadow Man a dismal score of 2 out of 5, they were quick to complain about everything from the gameplay to the inconsistent story. Shadow Man is the tale of Michael Leroy, an English graduate or dropout, the manual isn't quite sure, turned mystical assassin who must prevent the coming apocalypse. A hybrid of Tomb Raider and Quake, Shadow Man leans more towards the dexterous movement of Lara Croft than blatant rampaging, though a fair bit of shooting is required. The designers were clearly enamored by the game's mythological roots and nonlinear gameplay, and the complex storyline and environment could have earned Shadow Man a cult all its own. Unfortunately, though, the title feels rushed. Additional time spent ironing out kinks would have earned it another star. Now, if you're looking for the highest score, then look no further than GamePro. Giving the game a score of 4.5 out of 5, they explain that you may be playing in the dark, but Shadow Man's quality workmanship is plain to see. From the start, the audio is a chilling success. Foreboding music establishes the atmosphere for this horrific adventure, while the eerie sounds of dying enemies and creatures whispering your name before they attack is terrifying. Even more superbly frightening are the visuals in the enigmatic areas that you journey to in the land of the dead. Unfortunately, the periodic breakup hinders Shadow Man's movement, and sometimes you'll land on platforms that don't exist or get stuck behind an object that normally would be simple to maneuver around. Despite the game's minor flaws, Shadow Man is a thrilling exploration of the dark side of humanity. The story will keep you in suspense, and the action will make you break out in a cold sweat late at night. If you're a fan of this game, or just want to play it, then you might want to check out Night Dive's excellent remaster, which improves everything from the graphics to the gameplay. This Nintendo 64 version is still a lot of fun, but prepare yourself for a few extremely dated elements.
極限まで追い詰められる快感をお楽しみください。64ソフトバイオレンスキラー。まだまだ。
It's easy to see why the first Turok Dinosaur Hunter was a big hit with both critics and consumers. For one thing, it came out on the Nintendo 64 right before that huge wave of first-person shooters. Plus, it had a unique gimmick where you got to shoot all kinds of dinosaurs, something that was huge in the 1990s. A couple of years later, with a lot more competition and a strong sci-fi presence, Turok 2 was going to need to prove that the first game wasn't just a fluke. And you know what? The fans loved this 1998 sequel, selling well over 1 million units and spawning both a multiplayer spin-off called Rage Wars, as well as the proper third installment, Shadow of Oblivion. All these years later, many consider Seeds of Evil to be the best game in the entire Turok series. But what'd the critics say? No matter which magazine you were reading at the time, everybody loved Turok 2. Or, at the very least, they liked it a whole lot. Let's go ahead and start with Electronic Gaming Monthly, who gave it the lowest score, an 8.4 out of 10. Sean was impressed by the game's size and scope. Turok 2 is an excellent example of how to make a proper sequel. Everything about the game is bigger, much bigger. Bigger graphics, bigger levels, and bigger enemies, both in size and intelligence. My main two gripes are the distance between save points and the somewhat touchy analog controls when moving and aiming. Still, it's a very impressive title. Crispin also liked the game, but still had some complaints. Despite all its little bugs, namely choppy frame rates, a few bugs, some tedious bits, and a lack of save points, Turok 2 is still the epic, spectacular-looking game Nintendo 64 owners need to fill that void after Zelda. And, as with GoldenEye, you'll be playing Turok's multiplayer mode a year from now. It's not quite as good as GoldenEye, but close. Now, if you want to be technical, Computer and Video Games actually gave Turok 2 the lowest score when they gave it a 4 out of 5. But that's so close to EGM's score that it's hardly even worth noting. The good news is that it's only up from here. GamePro once again gave the game a strong score with a 4.5 out of 5, which is equal to the 9 out of 10 that you saw over at Edge. Turok 2 is a detailed and well-integrated title, not to mention an extremely enjoyable one. The technical AI and design advances made since the release of the original game are more than enough to elicit a favorable response. And, as with GoldenEye, there's a realistic sense of pace that is missing from all too many contemporary first-person PC shooters. A factor which players of those games don't seem to appreciate. Their loss. As we move our way up the scale, we see that Nintendo Power gave it a 9.2 out of 10, one of the highest scores of the year for a non-Nintendo published game. GameFan went a tick higher, giving Turok 2 a strong 93%. And then there's the notoriously grumpy Next Generation, who may have given the sequel a perfect 5 out of 5, but still had plenty of things to nitpick. Although clearly a significant advance over its predecessor, the sequel isn't without faults. As with most games in the first-person genre, extended stints of the one-player game can grow repetitive. Also, the later stages of the game are very tough, a result of the aggressive enemy AI and fiendish level design. The moment of calm before the storm, which are found in earlier sections of the game, are missing from the later stages, which reduce the impact of major events. Overall, Turok 2 is a real blast. The technical, AI, and design advances over the original make it an absolute must-have. Hang on, wait a second. The technical, AI, and design advances is literally word for word what Next Generation sister magazine Edge said in their review. Did the same person write this review? Either way, Turok 2 is a lot of fun. These days, I'd recommend checking out Night Dive's excellent remaster. But if you're a Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pack subscriber, then this creature feature is definitely worth checking out.
Evil this dark could bring him back. Only a game this big could do him justice. Turok 2, Seeds of Evil.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes just like this every time classic games get added to modern consoles. We have a whole playlist that covers literally every single Nintendo Switch Online game, plus just a whole lot more. Give it a watch when you have a few minutes to spare. Now, here's the question I have for you. What game are you going to be playing this Halloween? Look, it doesn't have to be a horror game, of course, but it would be super cool if it was. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, I actually had a completely different magazine matchup feature ready to go for today. But then Nintendo swooped in and just surprised everybody with their Nintendo 64 games. Look for that matchup tomorrow, followed on Thursday with a very scary Review Crew episode. That's right, it's more Review Crew. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.